All right. Hi, everyone. It's 10:30, so I'm going to get going here. And wow, I so appreciate just, I could get caught up watching the chat here. But thanks to those that have already contributed a prompt. The name of this session is Using a Design Mind for Doing Learning Online. A little bit of a rhyming phrase there, but basically taking an instructional design approach towards developing online learning experiences. Something that's optional, and I'll talk a little bit more about participation as we get going here. But in the chat, if you would, and you feel comfortable doing so, say hi, let us know who you are, and your role in education is helpful so we know who we're talking to. And then the prompt I have here to get us going is, what's one thing you learned teaching or leading through this pandemic that you hope to do long term? So I'm going to introduce myself, but if you want to let that roll in the chat, introduce yourself so that we can start to warm up the space a little bit. So my name is Jeff Gerlach. I am a course development manager with Michigan Virtual. And what I do in that role is I support teams of instructional designers, content experts, and partners to develop online learning courses for students and also professional learning for educators. I've been in various roles in my 7 years with Michigan Virtual. And those roles include being an instructional designer, myself, professional learning specialist for a time, and then also an instructional design coach. Before my time with Michigan Virtual, I was a secondary social studies teacher for 6 years in Wayne Westland Community Schools, primarily with seventh graders. So if there's any middle school folks out there, I'm one of the proud few that love that middle band age group. And I'll respond to the prompt myself. And I'll be vulnerable that I don't have all the words for this, but something I've been thinking a lot about during this time as I've been in more Zoom meetings and had less chance encounters with colleagues is just how important it is to be intentional about communication. I'm a person that thinks with my mouth sometimes. And I've realized that I take up a lot of oxygen doing that, and that this time has helped me to realize how important it is to truly listen, especially when there's a ton of distractions that kind of move my mind to various places. So I feel like in my professional life, I've started to hone and grow some skills of being more intentional about listening and collaborating with my colleagues. And something there too is using way less sarcasm, not leading with humor, not leading with myself. And I think it's for the better. And I hope that even when I do have these chance encounters where rapport can be built without scheduled meetings and things of that nature, chance encounters with folks, I hope that I can still be as intentional and mindful as I feel like I'm growing into. Brandon's helping me to facilitate and make sure that things just don't break in this session. But Brandon, I wonder in the chat if there's any interesting takeaways that folks are talking about that they're going to take forward with from their experience of teaching and learning through a pandemic.
Yeah, Jeff, Lindsay Howard shares that I have learned that learning never sleeps when you teach virtually, which I think we can all kind of relate to. Eric Mockerman says that I have learned that we can quickly pivot and do things we previously thought was impossible. There are a lot of reflections just saying like there are the flexibility from this period right now, trying to adapt that to the future, what normal looks like.
Yeah, that's a great takeaways. Thanks for summarizing that for me, Brandon, and putting that into the main space here. So speaking of session participation, we're going to have some options here, and it's going to be similar to how we've started off. There's going to be several stop, think, and reflect type activities, and I want to encourage you to choose how you engage with those. The chat can be a powerful tool. We'll keep that open. But I want to give you the option of reflecting privately with yourself, whether you're jotting down some notes or just doing some thinking in your head, or publicly putting your thoughts out there to kind of be in a think aloud space with others. I know that the chat can be really important. 100 and how many folks do we have here? 80 folks on this call. So 80 minds contributing in a space can be much more powerful than one presenter, or at least equally beneficial to the learning experience. Can also be overwhelming. So if I want you to know that it's purely optional, participate how you want to participate. And I hope that you can find the value that you need. Exercise your agency there. With that, 80 folks navigating, turning mics on and off and having conversations. For the most part, we're going to leave those on mute. Cameras, completely optional as well. I love seeing a couple of the faces that I see out there and hopefully see some smiles and get some, I like the feedback, the data of letting me know how things are hitting, but completely optional. At the end, we might have some time to turn mics on, and we'll kind of stage with raising your hands, and Brandon can help me navigate who's wanting to talk, but we'll see if time affords that. And our goal for this session, and this is a broad goal, is we'll discuss some concepts and strategies that my team, the instructional product development team at Michigan Virtual that designs professional learning courses, designs courses for students that are in complete online settings. We'll talk about some concepts and strategies that we use to guide the design of these learning experiences. And I've organized these into roughly two mindsets that I'm trying to give a name for that kind of encapsulates the purpose. One is called information alone is not instruction. And the second half of our talk here is seek ways to learn how designs are performing. And specifically, I use the word designs over students or learners. We're seeking to see how those designs are supporting those learners and how they're performing with learners. So let's get started with our first mindset. Information alone is not instruction. I'd like to start off with an activator activity. I've got a picture up on the screen right now. And I'd like you to consider what's going on in this picture that you can see. So call out things that you can see, either to yourself or in the chat. And what else is likely happening off camera. So again, you can choose to keep your reflection to yourself, or if you feel inclined, you can use the chat to think aloud.
So Sean is saying shows a flow with instruction about the steps. Sharon says connections. Robert says in the picture lecture, off camera, at least one student falling asleep. Amy says teacher using a visual on camera to explain the process off camera. Laura says without the reactor, nothing will happen. Angie says interdependence on parts create a cohesive whole process. Mabel says a learning process. Jamie says flowchart of process.
Brandon, you really got your NPR voice going today. Very calm and deliberate. I appreciate it. And Eric, I love the inference of at least one student falling asleep off camera. A lot of focus about like content, right? The flow chart of process. Folks are describing what they're seeing on the board here. So here's a couple more pictures of the environment that we've got going on. We've got a teacher there. We've got some students. I think that student that's like dead center, Eric, might be our nodding off student, or it just might be a lean. I've been known to have a lean as well, so I'm going to give trust and grace that student is still engaged. But there's more to the picture, and we infer that there was more to the picture going on there. But that first picture, I wanted to use it to kind of illustrate the bigger context from which a slide deck or other digital asset that is in one learning experience. In this case, it's being used in a learning experience that's facilitated in person. How that might look when it's taken out of that original context and put somewhere else. And I think it's something that that many folks on the call are probably have been wrestling with and getting better at and asking more questions about as we've been doing more hybrid and online learning over the past year. So like if you imagine this slide presentation without the chairs, the desk, the students side by side, teacher within the physical proximity of them, reading nonverbal cues, being able to process a lot of data like tacitly. Teachers are constantly taking in information, making adjustments, and doing things that that might not always be explicitly acknowledged in their brains. There's a lot of experience that compounds over time and knowledge that that goes into this very sophisticated teaching and learning tool that is the teacher. So when we move to an online space, something to consider is how to make these things explicit, how alterations are often needed in order to make sure that experience stays whole and doesn't become the digital assets being the only thing that is part of the learning experience. So something that can help us is to have a framework or a set of guideposts to kind of protect us, to ensure that there's a proper scope of learning here. Make sure that we hit on the things that we want to have. Again, I talked about like a lot of the function of there's a lot of tacit knowledge that that is in a teacher's brain, and how they adapt and provide supports to students, engage prior knowledge. And there's a lot of intuitive parts of the in-person experience that will need to be explicitly thought about how we're going to engage students in that when we get into an online space. So my team uses first principles as our framework from David Merrill. And we use it because it's rooted in good cognitive principles for how the brain learns, but it's also super functional to use. We'll sit side by side with this, and as we're being creative and letting our creative juices fuel what a learning experience might look like based upon the objectives or the standards, the performance outcomes if it's professional learning. We can sit there and say, okay, how are we going to activate prior knowledge here? What's our starter activity going to be? How can we make sure that that we're scaffolding new learning alongside of that old learning? The demonstration is, you could call it content, you could call it the learning event, new learning. It's that part that doesn't often get forgotten. And then application and integration. There's a lot of similarities in the wording here, but think of application as targeted skill practice, some scaffolded activities, and integration is about transfer. Learning is promoted when learners can demonstrate their new knowledge, reflect on or discuss their new knowledge, and even invent, create, and explore new ways to demonstrate that knowledge or skill. And then this all is within the context of this problem-centered environment. So we use this a lot, like to encourage like some backwards design. Like what does authentic use of these skills look like? And authentic can be really big, like, you know, real world events, or it can just be like a compelling problem that's an authentic way of demonstrating that a learner has met proficiency on the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that we're looking to aim out. So as we're fleshing out a lesson, we might cycle back and revisit, sit alongside Meryl, and say, you know, hone and lean into these different guideposts. So an example to set this up. So I'm going to video because I feel like video is one, a powerful demonstration or content resource, and then it's also plentiful in our online world. And so I'm a social studies teacher, so I found this agricultural revolution video from Crash Course. I think Crash Course is really powerful content. This might be good for my seventh graders that I had once upon a time ago. But it's important to focus on that it's not a full experience. It falls firmly, not a full learning experience. It falls firmly within that demonstration guidepost. So how might we think about centering YouTube as a part of the learning experience rather than as learning experience as itself? So and I don't know how many folks are familiar with Edpuzzle, but I'm going to use Edpuzzle as an example of a tool that can be used to kind of flesh out this video. Use the video as a starting point. Edpuzzle is a video-based lesson builder, and you can take any YouTube video and video from other sources, add it into Edpuzzle, and then you can add open response or multiple choice questions where the video will pause and you can insert the questions that you author. So what I did is I just did a quick search for agricultural revolution, and lo and behold, in Edpuzzle, it popped up with several lessons that other educators had built. So I want to take a look at some of the prompts that they use and see how it might align with Merrill's principles. So this is from Brenda Ray, and I don't know Brenda Ray from anyone else, but this is their lesson. And I noticed that Brenda uses a lot of predictive prompts. That was her approach to this video. So in this prompt, it's attempting to activate prior knowledge. So it's in that activator guidepost of Merrill's. And so the video will pause, and Brenda is prompting them to say, what's your best guess at what or why we made this change, why we went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies. So trying to have them predict and engage that prior knowledge before the demonstration content later in the video. And then just a functional piece of Edpuzzle here. Students will respond, put their response in there. Farming let us make more food, and then click continue, and they can move on with the lesson. Edpuzzle will track that data, so a teacher can come in and use it, and just check in like a formative assessment piece. And then Brenda also, here's another prompt from Brenda that this is a bit of an integration. Brenda's using a prompt to give students the opportunity to transfer new knowledge to everyday life. So foraging sounds awesome to me. How about you? What is foraging? What do you think it would have been like to live that lifestyle? So having them relate it to their everyday lives. And here's from a different educator, Ryan. Ryan used a lot of recall prompts as I was going through their Edpuzzle. So here's an example of a multiple choice question of like, why did early civilizations tend to develop near the shore? So this would pause the video after new learning happened, and would allow learners to do a little bit of recall, a check for understanding that would fall within that application guidepost. And just taking it out of Ed Puzzle and giving it another example. Here's an example of what I did to take this video and incorporate it as part of a learning experience that might be facilitated in Google Classroom. A couple things I want to call out here. I'm not using exactly activation, demonstration, application integration here. I'm using more language that would be good to communicate expectations and what it is to my students. So I had a student audience in mind as I was putting this here. So roughly, the thought starter aligns with activation. That would be some kind of a PK activating activity. The new learning part would be that demonstration. It's also got a bit of application with the prompts that I've got in there of that I want them to consider while they're watching that video, and the other world history for us all resource that I put in there. And then compare and contrast would be more application. That's likely a compare and contrast between hunter-gatherers and agricultural societies. And then my exit ticket would be my integrate piece for this, and have them connect with like previous academic knowledge and or personal knowledge so that we can get a little bit of transfer. So that's just a little bit of my thinking of a quick experience to put together just to model how I might sit alongside these guideposts from Merrill and lean into them as I'm trying to figure out how I turn a learning objective or an outcome or a content chunk into an experience that's going to align with good learning principles. So something I'm coming back to the first principles, putting it up on the screen so that I can remind you of it again. Take a moment just to consider how you might use, or if you're already using first principles to design online experiences. Again, you can choose to keep this reflection to yourself, or if you feel inclined, you can put it in the chat to think aloud with others. But what opportunities do you see? What might you already be doing? You might even think of a recent lesson and kind of do a quick analysis of what you really leaned into well here, not even knowing that this was a thing. You might even talk about, it's really interesting. I don't always do an activation that's keyed in on each individual student prior knowledge or something like that. Just reflect. What opportunities do you see, and what might you already be doing? I'll give you a moment to do that reflection, either in your brain or in the chat. So some really interesting takeaways. Wesley, it's really interesting how you made the connections with the guideposts and with your hybrid model, how they roughly align to the different days. I find that really interesting. And then there's a lot of talk about tools and how they help and support different guideposts. And then there's like even a little bit of self-assessment going on. I'm in the chat, and I imagine in folks' heads about this as well. Good feedback for me, and I hope good reflection for folks. All right, as that continues on, I'm going to shift our focus to the second mindset. So this mindset is seek ways to learn how designs are performing. And I said in my intro that I've been very intentional about using designs rather than how learners are performing. So something that our team has been doing a lot of is thinking about, okay, like how do we know, like if we're applying our cognitive psychology principles with Merrill's, we've got lots of experience designing learning experiences. We've got heaps of research that informs what we do. But like, how do we know how they're working, like with our specific designs that we put out there? So I'm going to activate your thinking a little bit with this mindset. And I'd like you to think about what research means to you. You can choose to keep your reflection yourself, obviously, and then also think aloud in the chat. But what does research mean to you? And I'm going to give you a heads up. In the next couple slides, I'm going to have quite a bit of prompting and pausing. So hey, Brandon, what are you seeing as far as themes here?
Yeah, I see a lot of exploration, investigation, insight, perspectives, views, looking for ways to improve, seeking answers to question, adventures into the unknown. A lot of common adjectives, I would say, or similar adjectives, I would say.
That's great. Thanks, Brandon. Now I want to add kind of a log to that thinking fire that you've got going on. I'd like to give you a moment to skim this quote. Now, as you finish your skim, think about how this compares to the thoughts you had on the previous slide. How much does it affirm what you said and what your thoughts were when you think of research? And how might it challenge or have you thinking somewhat differently about it? You can use the chat or just do that reflection to yourself if you feel appropriate. So again, I'm hitting you with a lot of information up front here. And so I'm trying to provide ample time to pause and reflect. But I want to make it clear, this is not a traditional bad, action good kind of scenario here. Just kind of pointing to action research as a concept and why my team has come to favor it. As you look at this table, to synthesize a couple takeaways and summarize my team's perspective on this, we really like how the focus is on problems or unknowns within the courses we're designing, or if you're in a school, this would be in your classrooms and in your school environment, that it's about gathering functional data or using functional data to grow our understanding of design practice and not and our learners' experiences engaging with our designs. It's not necessarily to produce broad findings or universal takeaways that we have high degree of certainty with that will apply to any teaching and learning situation. We use a lot of research that traditional research that comes our way and let that inform our thinking too. But as it comes to our specific designs, we find action research to be really valuable. We can stay curious, and we can continuously stay curious as we're developing. Like, I wonder how students are really feeling about these flip grids. We think that they're engaging because they're creating short videos, but are they as engaged with this as they would be in a text-based discussion? How do we find that out? Well, let's develop a process that we might learn a little bit more to make a little bit more evidence-based claims based upon what's going on in our own backyard. And it's proven to be a really good collaborative piece too. Having conversations with our colleagues and reflecting together on these things and devising ways to learn more has brought us together. It really greased the professional gears a little bit of these conversations, these collaborative conversations. So how might this look? How might this present itself in the wild, so to speak? So I've got a couple scenarios here. These are not real people, not real feedback, just synthetic examples. But on the left, this teacher tried Padlet and Padlet is a digital bulletin board tool that you can put learners in, and they can write on stickies or post pictures on stickies. And they were met with some heartburn when some of the students, let's just say, were using it in non-lesson related ways. I think that we all can imagine or have personal experience about what that might look like. So they came to the conclusion that this doesn't work, and they abandoned it. On the right, we have a teacher that put a supplemental resource page together, but they don't really know how it's being used. Is anyone using them? And if they are using them, how effective might it be? What's it producing? What's its it might have an intended purpose, but what's the functional purpose that it's settled to solve? So something, we'll take that Padlet one and kind of explode it and put the start of an action research process behind it. It's the same starting point. They tried Padlet. Students posted things unrelated to the lesson. But this time the teacher thinks, what might be some reasons that happened? And that's a starting point for a cascade of curiosities, questions, potential research questions that followed. And this why layer is a helpful starting point and a what we find to be a good access into how action research can come alongside our design process. So what might it look like? There's a lot of research out there about action research. We've got a couple thick books that we've been diving into, but I try to distill it into just it's like some a helpful graphic here. So being able to identify questions at the start here, identify research questions, identifying research questions that we're curious to learn more about, identifying a test opportunity within the digital classroom. This might be, with the Flipgrid example or the Padlet example, it might be, okay, we're going to look at this upcoming lesson uses Padlet. And we think about how are we going to gather data from this? Are we going to see the responses themselves and check it against some kind of rubric or something like that? Or in the sake of Padlet, maybe we're going to put a survey out there to ask students, okay, how did you feel about this? Did you feel engaged? Was it useful? Get some more attitudinal data from them on that. And after the data has been collected, we analyze, we look for trends, start to consider implications. And when we reflect, we want to honor those trends, identify some potential takeaways, stay tentative with might language, and then determine what the limits of that data is and be honest with it. Do we have a small sample size? Yes. Is it still functional information? And especially what other questions are starting to arise. We find that like a good action research process probably produces like 5 times the amount of questions coming out of it than it does necessarily answers, especially if it's like the first attempt at trying to find out a little bit more about something that we really don't know how it's performing. And we might enter in this research cycle at any of the stages. So we might be presented with, like, we might stumble across some data, maybe in the LMS, we start seeing, wow, learners are stuck on that page for a lot more time than they are other pages. What might be some reasons that's happening? So we can enter in at any one of these stages, and you might end up producing a big backlog of curiosities, which can feel like it's time consuming. Like I can't do action research, all these action research things, but I think something that the action research process helps with is you should be limiting yourself to 1 or 2 things that you're actively like trying to build test opportunities for. So in a way, you're encouraging yourself to be curious about more things, but you're also limiting what, you're taking it step by step. I'm going to work on this particular aspect here, this Padlet tool, how I'm using it. I'm going to find out more about how my learners are experiencing it and what the value is there. And then I'll move on to something else. So in a way, it's doing more, it's thinking, it's producing more questions, but also in a way it's kind of streamlining and helping us to prioritize what we're investigating on a little bit deeper level. I think it's helpful to like share what my team has been doing. So I'm going to share an example of one of our action research projects, or questions rather, and kind of show the process. And I want to show that it's not a perfect clean takeaway, that it is a messy process, but hopefully you can see the value of the insight that we're starting to glean. So a subgroup within our instructional product development team. And again, our team is full of instructional designers and folks that develop online courses for students and for teaching professionals. And we this group was curious about formative assessment format. So we use a tool called CourseArc that allows us to create a bunch of visual application formative assessment items. So you're probably familiar with some of these terms: quizzes, written responses, flashcards, drag and drop matching, interactive matching. So firmly in the application zone, practice, formative assessments, different visual ways where we're having students interact and move things and input things, and getting that real-time feedback back to them. We were curious if any of these are more likely to be engaged with than others. Oftentimes, formative assessments are purely ungraded. So the student has an option they can opt in to using them or skip past them. So we looked in our physiology course, our health course, and a French course to kind of learn more about this. And so how do we construct the test opportunity? So for this one, we identified we needed some attitudinal data, some feedback from the students themselves. So we created a Google form, took screenshots of the interactive, and the surveys contain like 6 to 8 questions that each focused on or focused on these various interactives, and we had them assess on a Likert scale. So no qualitative feedback, just some quantitative feedback of numbers. 1 being not useful, 5 being really super helpful. Couldn't live my life without it. And the takeaways our findings were kind of interesting. It appeared to be students appeared least likely to engage with the written response interactives. So when they were asked to write a response, they were least likely to engage with that. And they appeared most likely to engage with image labeling. So having a graphic and dragging and dropping the activities, or even filling in the words for those activities. In anatomy, there was some differences here based upon the content. So flashcards in anatomy and physiology on average scored a 2.5 in the Likert scale, but scored a 4 in health. So we became a little curious about with different content, it makes sense that maybe that's a reason why it's different there. Something interesting is that they're likely to engage with quiz interactives across all 3 subject areas. So our standard like multiple choice quiz type questions seem to be some learners are telling us that they are likely to engage with it. And they prefer drag and drop activities over drop down activities. So moving things that they can already see versus clicking on a button and getting a list of items that they can select from. So again, it's important to honor the limitations of the study. There's a super small N here, 28 respondents across all 3 courses surveyed. But if we think about the N in your classrooms, in your schools, it'll be small. And I think that that's something that is to be acknowledged, that it can't speak for too broad of an audience, these findings, but it can help us to know more about the learners that are in front of us in the here and now, that are directly in our charge, or maybe across several different teachers' charges. And then we only looked into 3 subject areas, and we only looked at students enrolled in these classes during a certain period of time. But the implications we find valuable. As instructional designers, we can use this information to inform our design decisions when creating formative assessment interactives. Especially like knowing that these ungraded formative assessments increase student learning from past studies, and then also traditional research and cognitive principles that we know about the value of formative assessments. We want them to engage, and we want them to engage authentically because they find value in it. So while this can't speak, I mean, sometimes the content, and we need to explore that further, different content lends itself better to representing different interactive types. But at least from a attitude perspective that learners have, they've indicated clear preferences for some formative assessment types across various content types. So it's important to take that information in, really honor it, of like, hey, let's use this when we're making a decision and it's a push of what type we're going to use. We should talk about what students are likely to engage with, but temper it alongside other factors that might inform design decisions. And then we end with recommendations for future studies, and these often end up being a lot of additional questions. So we might want to survey additional courses to see if the findings hold up across a larger context. And we're curious about the subject matter and the likelihood, what that impact of the likelihood of engagement might be. All right. So I'd like to revisit the concept of action research here, and give you a moment in the chat or in your own head. What research questions might you be curious to explore as you're sitting and listening to this? I wonder if there's any curiosities of like, oh wow, there's a problem there that I'd like to find out more about, like why is that happening? Or hey, I'm doing this, I really don't know how this is, how learners are engaging with this, or it's impacting them, how useful it is. So take a moment to reflect, either in your head or in the chat. What are some action research questions you might be asking yourself? All right, and as you're finishing up your thinking about those questions you might be asking yourself, I just wanted to provide like a perspective on my thinking, and please, while I'm talking, chime in the chat of things that you've become aware of. But I thought it might be helpful to talk about data you might consider, because my example here was a Google form sent out to students, and that's a valuable resource. Getting feedback directly from students targeted on like, how do you feel about these certain instructional moves that we've been doing, or this particular interactive. But things to consider in our online spaces. It's not necessarily that data is more rich. It's just more like what we think about data being, which is more numbers and text and things that we can access at any time. But it's important to think about when we're not in an in-person environment, all the rich data sources that we lose, the ability to connect, impromptu with students, all the nonverbal cues, the collaborative patterns, the disruptions. All of disruptions are happening. We just might not be aware of it. So thinking about what is at our disposal to help us see, in a more metaphorical sense, quiz results, submitted assignments, any formative activity that gets saved to the LMS, like time spent on page that I mentioned before. Seeking out like what are ways that ones and zeros and you know, the receipts, the footprint that students leave in courses. What can it kind of tell us about things? Can we put personas together of how learners are engaging differently? And then non-academic data, content viewed and time spent on pages, and time of day, even learners are active, can be helpful to just, they might not be immediately on the surface knowing how we can put in action, use it as part of action research. But knowing that these sources exist can help us be creative about how we create test opportunities. And then attitudinal data is what I focused on, so I won't spend too much time on that. But I'm going to look in the chat real quick to see.
Jeff, I want to call attention to Mary's comment. She's saying that she would love to know about what online learning apps students enjoy and are more likely to utilize. Since there are so many, she has seen very little activity with Padlet. So she's wondering if anyone has experienced more engagement with a different app with their students. So using that data to, what do the students really enjoy? What really gets them to engage? If anyone has any examples of that, or Jeff, if you have any examples of things that you've heard of, because we have, you know, we have these laundry lists of different apps that are available to us. But what are the good ones?
Right. Thanks for bringing that up, Brandon. Yeah, I think first off, Mary, it's a really great curiosity, and I think it should be honored as that. And I think it's great that you put it in the chat for others to chime in about the different apps that they're using, or even, you know, what the successes that that folks have found with Padlet, and maybe some of their takeaways. But I think it's something to explore a bit. I don't know that any one app or use of an app is universal across across different classrooms. The context matters, but we can definitely learn from one another with that. But I think that the finding of like, that's data. There's very little activity with Padlet. So why is that? And should we be using something different, or can we engage in different ways? Can we find out? Can we ask students like, why aren't you engaging with Padlet? What are some things that are a little bit off-putting? It might be interesting to find that out. I do want, Brandon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the last slide. And again, I'd like you to encourage you, if the personal reflection is a preference for you, you do not need to feel compelled to turn your microphone on and talk with us. But what's something that you'll share with someone that wasn't in the, I'm being punny a little bit here, that wasn't in the Zoom today? That maybe a colleague or someone else. What's something that you'll share with someone that wasn't in the Zoom today? And in the bottom of the Zoom here, there's a reactions button, as Brandon was talking about. If you click that and raise a hand, Brandon, could you cue folks up, and Brandon will say your name, and you can unmute, and you can ask, you can share your prompt.
Absolutely. Melissa, go ahead and unmute your microphone and share, and then we'll follow up with Rebecca.
Great, thank you. So I was really excited to see the first principles of instruction, and I have already kind of thought of some ways that I can introduce that to my teachers as we move into the rest of the year, so that we can increase the I guess effectiveness of the instruction that's happening already.
Thanks for sharing that, Melissa. That sounds exciting. And good luck in working with them.
This is Rebecca. One of the things that we're doing in my face-to-face school, we've been in a hybrid model where we have half the students there every day since mid-August. So we haven't really been at home very much, except for the 3 weeks in December. And so I'm part of the team that works with the other teachers just how to online teach because it's so new for them. And I'm a part-time instructor for Michigan Virtual. And specifically, as teachers are going and continuously self-evaluate and go, what am I doing wrong? How can I fix this? And they come to me for ideas. And sometimes I'm exhausted enough that I'm out. But your action reaction cycle, at the end of, in our next faculty meeting, I'll be speaking out based on what I learned here at today's training. And so that's one of the little slides that I'd like to use to give everybody a prompt to kind of ask themselves, how can I see what's working for my students and not working? So I loved that slide in particular, amongst the other things.
Thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca helped me think about something just there. Brandon, is I want to share these slides, and I haven't shared the link for it yet. Maybe I can. There's no chat here, but maybe we can figure out a way to share it in the share it out to folks.
Yeah, in the Event Owl space for this session, there is a functioning chat there that you could put it in, as well as we're planning on sending an email after today is over with a link to all slides from all of the sessions and all of the recordings that we have available to us. So that will come via email to the email that you registered for today with, and then perhaps you could post the link to those slides in that Event Owl chat functionality.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I'll put it in Event Owl when we're done here.
Okay, we have got Wesley and then Mitchell. And Wesley, if you're speaking, we're having trouble hearing you.
All right, hopefully that's better.
Okay.
So what I was saying was that at the beginning of the year, we knew we were going to be hybrid, and we knew we were going to be teaching face-to-face Monday, Wednesday, Friday, with Tuesday, Thursday being asynchronous, but that was really all. We didn't have any guidance. And I was saying to a coworker who's also, she's at a different workshop, but I was talking about this one, saying this would have been really helpful in September to kind of have that guiding point. So my big plan is to be sharing this with everyone in a group email saying, look at this design. Let's talk about this, because there are still a lot of teachers that worry about learning loss and how can I possibly cover everything. And this really helped the design activator, those steps, not even steps, those ideas kind of take the Goliath that is pandemic teaching and makes it a little more manageable, giving us our rocks and our slingshot.
I really appreciate that feedback, and yeah, I'm glad you found the principles useful and the presentation useful in that respect. And yeah, good. It's always good to be able to develop and hone some mindsets that that are memorable and over time become part of the process rather than a separate new thing to have to memorize and learn. Anything that can help us simplify and prioritize is great. Can we talk to Mitchell, Brandon, and then we'll call it good?
Sounds great.
It might be a little more personal of a question. I'm currently a PhD student in instructional design and technology, and you were talking about some of the research you've done. And I just wonder if you guys have done any research for fully remote learners and the efficacy of the program for them based on some of their demographics. For instance, do they have parents who are present and participatory in their learning? Do they have access to teachers? So some of those peripheral services, do they have access to mentors? And I think we can all assume what some of the outcomes would be, but I wonder if Michigan Virtual has done any research, any specific research toward that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mitchell. As far as like action research that our team has done specifically towards demographics, and you mentioned the presence of a mentor, which pings with me a lot, thinking about online learning models and systems of support. Since the pandemic, we haven't engaged in action research with it. But as far as like pre-pandemic support, we know that we know that the mentor makes a tremendous difference. In our model with our virtual school, like there's a mentor on staff, and the efficacy of that mentor and makes a significant difference for students learning online, and the outcomes that they have. And we've done a lot of thinking, but not materializing it into research, because I feel like it's emerging of like students are in the home now a lot more than they were. And the parent takes on that mentor role that we used to have for like associate pretty closely with just an education professional. And so just there's all sorts of, and I'm sure that you've gone down the curiosity rabbit hole of like are these parents' social emotional needs being met, and what impact might that have on their ability to support learners in the home? So a lot of that is like I'm joining in the curiosity with you, Mitchell, in my response to that. But just honoring that, like, yes, that's important work, and working on that together is important things for us to figure out, especially if things are like this for the next 5 years, right? Not knowing exactly what new normal will look like. Thanks for that reply, or that message. I think that's a good one to end on.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff, for this discussion. Thank everyone for joining. If you want to close out of this session here, go back to Event Owl and click on the ending keynote section that should be starting in a few minutes here. So thanks, everyone.